And maybe just quickly tell you a little bit more about who I am. I'm here from Sydney, Australia. I do sound a little bit English, but I bleed green and gold. I am Australian. The work that I do over there in Australia is working with big organisations, helping them get more women, particularly at the senior management level. So this is a subject very close to my heart. I often talk for half-day, whole-day sessions on this. It's a very complex problem. There's no one thing that you can point at that we can fix to get around the current state. But I haven't got all day, and I haven't got half a day. I've got 7 or 8 minutes. So I'm going to be quite narrow in what I talk about, because I suspect these lovely ladies sitting next to me will each bring their own perspective that's probably going to touch on some of the other issues. So look, glass ceiling, sticky floor. I'm guessing some of you were thinking, especially some of the girls perhaps, what is the sticky floor? What is that? And maybe even the glass ceiling term is not something familiar to you. There's a lot of very high-profile businesswomen around that we can point to, the Sheryl Sandbergs, and even in politics, you can look at people like Hillary Clinton. They're up there. There's no problem. These women have all made it. But the fact is there's not very many of them. And that's what we're talking about today. So the glass ceiling, for those of you that might not be familiar with that term, it's a sort of colloquial saying that has come into being that really refers to professional women, so women who are in sort of business careers. And it's this invisible barrier, this transparent, invisible thing that seems to stop the women that are there in that workforce around the world getting to the very top. And they really don't. So, I can tell you some of the numbers from Australia. We have our university graduates, the women come out at about 55%. So there's more women than men coming out of university. They go into the big businesses at about the same numbers. So there's generally more women than men going in at the lower levels of the big businesses. At the top, it depends what you look at. If you look at all the companies, we're sitting at about 15% women CEOs. But if you look at our really big listed influential companies, it's about 3 or 4% at the top. So something happens, they vanish, they disappear in a big magical trick, never to be seen again. And there's a very clear line where that happens. So I do a lot of recruitment, and I do it at senior levels. So in US dollar terms, I've found it's very good to talk about salary levels, because it cuts across any industry. It cuts across manufacturing or banking. And there is a very clear drop in the numbers around 100,000 salary package. It's not too exact, but around that. So I'm talking US dollars here. So Aussie, it's about 150,000. And what you see in big influential corporations, so these things like banks that have a very, very important influence in our lives. It's our what we call superannuation, your 401ks, your savings, the products that they sell. The numbers drop from about 35% down to about 16%. And it's sweeping statements, but typically that's what you see is a big step change in the numbers, and then another steep step change up to the really senior management. So that's where this glass ceiling is. It tends to be professional. Now, the sticky floor, I actually think this was probably meant one way, but there is a second interpretation. The sticky floor is about what women actually do to hold themselves back. Okay, so, it's the not taking a risk, not putting yourself forward for the job. And there's been a lot of discussion about this in the media recently with people like Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In. And we've had some very influential commentators in Australia who have talked about the fact that women are actually the problem. If we all just took more risks and went for all these jobs and asked for more money, there wouldn't be a problem, And my body language is telling you what I think of that, okay? But there definitely is, okay? So I see, as a recruiter, I see a lot of women, and we're talking senior women. So, let me give you a few oohs and ahs. But I can talk to someone who is very senior at a big bank, okay, and she'll be earning $800,000, okay. She's on big money. She's working really, really hard. She's worked long and hard to get there. And I will talk to her about the next job she's going to, and she will say to me, almost to a woman, "I know I'm being paid a lot, and I won't get that when I move." Okay? And I go, why would that be? Can you imagine a man saying that? I'm at the top of my game and I know it's apologetic. So that I do see it, there is an element there. It is not the main problem, okay? It is an existence, and we have to accept that. So that's the sticky floor. I think the second interpretation, which is worth just touching on, is it can also be used in areas that are not deemed professional services. So things like nursing or teaching, education. And what happens there, and I'm sure it's the same here in the US, is predominantly nurses and teachers are women. But when you look at school principals, or you look at people who are running the hospitals, they're predominantly men. And I can tell you what it looks like in Australia. So it's about 75% of teachers in schools up to high school are women. But 75% of principals are men. So how does that work? If we've got something fair happening in the organisations, and you'd see something similar in hospitals. Majority women at the bottom, majority men at the top. So it's a slightly different interpretation, because that's not about what's holding the women back, but it's a different view. So I want to put that out so you know what we're talking about. I said it's a complex problem. It's complex because it's often very cumulative. The things that cause this to happen accumulate over the time of a woman's career. So they can start off, and I have seen this myself. I used to work at Deloitte, and hopefully no one from Deloitte is here, and certainly you'll be from US Deloitte, so no one will sue me. Australian Deloitte, but we and I was in corporate finance, and we used to recruit graduates, okay, and they would come in, and the average graduate salary was about 50,000 Australian dollars, and we had a $5,000 pay gap at the entry level for graduates who were coming out of the same universities, doing the same degrees, between the men and the women. 5,000. So right at the start, before they've even walked in the door, the women were getting paid $5,000 less. Now, the partners, okay, so I really hope there isn't anyone from Deloitte, because I will get sued here, okay? But I want to show you what it looks like. I want you to give you some faces to what this looks like. So they had, at the time, I think they had about 470 partners in Australia, and about 70 of those were women. That's what it looked like, okay? But only, so this is in the whole of Australia. As hopefully you all know, Australia is a huge place. It might not have a huge population, but it's a really big country. In the whole of Australia, only 13 of those women actually dealt with clients. The rest were all back office. They were internal finance, internal risk. So there were 13 women partners in the whole of Deloitte in Australia that actually dealt with customers. It's interesting, isn't it? And yet they're coming in at 55% at the bottom, but they're not at the top. Now, they've been paid $5,000 less before they've even walked in the door. What do you think happens every year when they get their pay rise? Okay, because that pay gap doesn't go away. They continue to get less than the men, but it accumulates. So what happens is we see the problem at senior management level, but the problem exists from the minute you walk into the workforce. And it really does. A lot of people say there's no pay gap, there's no discrimination here. It exists. I see it, and it often gets swept under the table. So I talk about mountains are made up of molehills piled up on top of each other. And often when you challenge something that you see, like a $5,000 pay gap, you get told, really, Kate, it's just $5,000, or it was just a joke, or you don't get the environment that we're in, okay? Because it's seemingly trivial to the people that don't care, okay? But there's 20 of those seemingly trivial things that add up. So it is really important, and it's difficult to challenge because it's often seemingly small, and people can trivialise it and say you don't understand. Okay, well, I'm going to ignore you and carry on going. Okay.
It's your topic.
What I want to do here, you can tell I do talk for days on this. I just want to introduce this nasty word, which is bias, okay? And we all have it. Often people talk about unconscious bias and they talk about men, okay? We all have it. We rely on biases. They're very important. They help us get through the world. They help us jump and run when we see a big scary snake, as you often do in Australia. Okay? Because you don't stop, do you? You see a big snake or something. I don't think Hawaii has anything that kills you, okay? I'm used to a world where we have scary spiders and scary snakes. Okay? You see a snake, you don't go and look at it and go, but is that a python that won't bite me? Or is it poisonous? You just go, snake, run, because you have biases that tell you snakes are dangerous, don't stand on it, run away as fast as you can. We rely on them. We rely on them from mundane things to important things that stop us getting killed. And we use them in the workplace all the time. We use them ourselves. I do it all the time and catch myself saying he instead of they when I'm talking about doctors and surgeons and, other. From being small kids, we're conditioned what a doctor looks like. So I want to introduce bias. I'm hoping that one of these ladies will continue the conversation. I'd really like to encourage you to, and I'm happy to send you a link, there was a really great video that I saw recently, which was a group of small kids. They must have been 4 or 5. They were so cute. It was in the UK, and they were in their school classroom, and they were asked to draw a fighter jet pilot, a surgeon, and a fireman. And one person in that room drew one of those characters as a woman. And then the teacher said to them, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous film. Then the teacher said to them, would you like to meet a real fireman and a real fighter jet and a real surgeon? They were like, yeah! And in came these women. And the woman was dressed as a fire. I get all tingly. This woman was dressed as a fire. One of the little girls shouts out, they're dressing up. They're dressing up. And then you see them getting to talk to these women. So those kids couldn't contemplate, aged 4 or 5, that a surgeon, a fighter jet, and a fireman could be women. So we need to think about that. Now I'll sit there.
Aloha, I'm Kay Holly Coleman from the YWCA of Oahu. I did not make the first panel, and that's why I'm here, and so I had a slightly different presentation to give, so who knows what I'm really going to say. I brought a PowerPoint, which I never ever do, and I'm not sure whether it's going to be relevant or not. But at any rate, maybe we'll go a little bit on the PowerPoint just to give people an idea. So the YWCA, can you go from the top? So the YWCA's mission, really, just very shortly in what I do, is empowering women and eliminating racism. You can go on to the next one. And we have 3 facilities in which we meet our mission. And they each have one is a residence, one is downtown, and the other one is camp and retreat. So they're very, very different. We're a nonprofit, as you know. I think you're from the YWCA too, no?
No.
Okay. So the YWCA is a international association. So the way that we meet our mission is by all of these various programs, but the interest of what I was to speak on is the economic advancement program. So I think those are coming up, if you can just go on. So economic advancement, so I guess I would say, if we're talking about the glass ceiling, that basically the women that we're working with are so far from the glass ceiling. We're working with women who are coming out of incarceration, they're coming out of domestic violence, coming out of illness, divorce. They are hard to employ, they're underemployed, or they're unemployed. So this is our population. So if a woman gets a minimum wage job here in Hawaii and has 2 children, she's on the poverty line. And so this is who we are working with to bring them up to a sustainable level here in Hawaii, which is a really hard place to do that because it's very, very expensive here. So one of the programs, so we do it in 2 ways, job support and housing support. So the Dress for Success program, which is a worldwide program, has 3 programs under it: a suiting program, a job readiness program, and a job retention program. So I think in the middle one, in the job readiness program, you might ask, well, okay, if a woman has been incarcerated for, well, I'm going to show you a film at the end, so somebody needs to gong me at 5 minutes. Was in prison for 36 years. So what kind of work are you going to do with a woman like that in order to get her up and sustainable? That's the question that we work with. So what we've discovered really is that, you know, how do you begin? We work with where are you at right now? What are your strengths? What is the very next thing that you need that moves you forward? Let's help you do that, and then we'll take the next step and the next step and the next step. So they're very small steps, very small successes, but those small successes build confidence and hope, and that's how we get them employed. So in that job readiness program, 70% of them are employed by the end of the 8-week session. Personal Pathways, which you see up there, is a personal and professional development program for our clients. And so you can go on. So at Fernhurst Residence, we work strictly with women coming out of incarceration. So on the second floor, we have a work furlough program. On the third floor, we have a transitional housing program. So I don't know if you can just imagine being out of the marketplace for a long time. And really taught not much in prison. It's a huge, huge transition to come out of there and be able to support yourself. So in the work furlough program, one of the ways that we do it is through a progressive expansion of circles, where a woman comes in and she's in that very small circle, and as she gains confidence and skills, she's able to save money. She meets various requirements. She gets more and more, well, how do you say it? I don't want to say benefits, but she gets more and more freedom, really, as she goes through this whole process. So this is an evidence-based process that is based on working with trauma-informed programs. And then we have the Mink Business and Leadership Center, which is what many of you might know as the women's business centers around the country. So anyway, on the subject of glass ceiling, I mean, basically what we are doing is working with economically disadvantaged women, taking them from unemployment to employment, to the possibility of self-employment, and then on to leadership. And we do that through both housing and jobs. So it kind of takes a village. It takes all of our partnerships to be able to accomplish that. And what inspires us is the families that are behind all of these women. Because all these women are mothers, grandmothers, and behind all of them are children. So I think I will leave it at that, and if you can play our video. This is a video of Marianne, and she was in prison for 36 years. You just close that. Oh no, this is Marianne. Videos.
Oh yeah, Marion.
It did, though, you played it. At the very beginning. I don't remember working. It's there. If you go there. Marianne.
Just try it. Sorry.
Oh, it doesn't work. It doesn't work?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll just go ahead and pass for now then.
We'll try and get the technology sorted so that we can show you at the end. So, Enga mana, enga reo, enga rangatiratanga. I am greeting you in Māori. I'm from New Zealand, and I have just honoured the mana in this room and the words of wisdom that are being spoken by the women on this wonderful panel, and the leadership. I think Kate has done a fabulous job. Can you hear me, everybody? Speak up. I'll use the mic.
Sorry,
Thank you. Kate has done a wonderful job giving you a really good definition of the glass ceiling and the sticky floor. And I think hearing from Kehaulani some very practical examples of how support can really help you move through that. I'm a boring economist, and I'm just going to give you some data points as to why this really matters. A little bit of a quiz. Can anybody tell me how many countries in the world don't have legislated gender equality? So Kate talked about bias. Let's actually look at legislation. There's 193 UN member countries. Let's look at them. How many do you think might not have legislated gender equality? So a level playing field for all of us as women. Take a wild guess. 3/4. Slightly more. Any bid on 3/4? So we have 75%. Anybody else have a guess? This is 2016, ladies. Over 90% of countries in 2016 have at least one discriminatory law on the books. And I know because when I was at the World Bank, I started a project called Women, Business and the Law. My husband, who's a lawyer, told me I was mad. He said, only a boring old economist would try to do that. But what's interesting is that as this research project every year documents the playing field, we can see that there is indeed a glass ceiling for women in over 90% of countries. Now, my next question is, are there any countries in the world where gender equality is actually a reality? And some of you may know about the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report, which has been documenting this for the last 10 years. Are there any countries in the world where gender equality actually exists in practice? Do I have any optimists in the room? You're right, there's none. So, in fact, this whole thing of the glass ceiling and the sticky floor is still a reality. And you know, the crazy thing about it is that it makes no economic sense. Some of you, and I know there's a number of bankers in the room, or ex-bankers like me, may have remembered back when there was a New York Times op-ed just after the financial crisis. And Thomas Friedman said, well, if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman Brothers and sisters, we wouldn't have had a financial crisis. And he was right. There is now so much economic data, longitudinal data, which shows that diversity brings a big increase in return on investment. So this is all about the business case. This is all about economic good sense. And yet, here we are without a level playing field. So I wanted to share some tips with you. I was very privileged a few years ago to write a couple of books for Random House on women in business when I led the Women in Business program at Westpac Banking Corporation. And I was just so lucky to interview some of the top women in Australia and New Zealand who actually gave their tips. So I'm going to read you some, but I distilled it down into 5 things for today that I want you all to remember, especially those of you who are still at school. So I broke them up into B's and N's, not quite N's. So the first one is actually to be bold and back yourself. And I want to share just one little story. When I first got into the foreign ministry, I was so excited because I wanted to save the world, and I had just finished up my East-West Centre scholarship here 30 years ago, went back and was asked to take the notes for the Pacific Economic Cooperation Conference meeting. And I was so excited, it was my first note-taking job. And then my boss came over and said to me in a very quiet word, Amanda, there's a bit of a problem. The Americans have just realised that A. Ellis is a woman. And I said, oh, is that a problem? And he said, well, yes, because they're hosting the meeting at the Wellington Club. And of course, the Wellington Club is an all-men's club, so you won't be able to go. And I looked at him with incredulity in my eyes and said, well, surely they'll change the venue. And he said, oh no, we couldn't possibly upset the Americans. And had I known then what I know now, it's actually illegal under US law for the Americans to be hosting at the Wellington Club. And so I stewed about this for about 3 months. I had sleepless nights, you know, I'd done feminist theory here at UH Manoa, and I was thinking, am I a cop-out? I'm not saying anything. So I talked to a few people and they said, don't say anything. All the senior management in the foreign ministry belong to the Wellington Club. And if you say anything, you're only a diplomatic trainee. the end of your year, you won't be confirmed. So my first lesson had to be true to myself, I had to be brave. And I really just was breaking down. So I went and saw the Secretary to the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, and I explained my predicament. I said, I'm going to have to resign. I cannot stay. This organisation isn't consistent with my values. And she said, well, Ms. Ellis, rarely do I allow a diplomatic trainee an interview with the Secretary, but in your case, I shall make an exception. Just don't tell anybody. So in I went to see Mr. Norrish, and I explained what had happened. And he looked at his feet, and he looked at the ceiling, and he said, well, Ms. Ellis, I propose the following to you. I propose to write to the Wellington Club, pointing out to them that women are now entering the workforce in greater numbers. We're talking 1988. And if they do not acknowledge this fact, they will lose revenue. Is that satisfactory? And I was thinking to myself, hell no, that's not satisfactory at all. But I said, yes, thank you very much, Mr. Norrish, and kind of backed out of the room. But it was something that stayed with me later as I was running the women's business program at Westpac. It's all about the business case. How can you make the case that you are valuable and that you deserve to be paid not $5,000 less than the guys, but to start on a level playing field? So it was actually a really important lesson for me that there's different ways of framing this issue. There's a human rights dimension to it, obviously, a parity, a fairness issue, but there's also the business case. And so just remembering that and being bold, being brave, and knowing what you're worth. So my second B is actually, how do you think about the bigger context? There's always a cultural context. And thinking about how you buddy up. As women, there is a cultural dimension to us being bold and promoting ourselves. But it's really easy to promote other women. You meet all sorts of amazing women. So at Westpac, we did an experiment. And in our business banking unit, we paired up women and we said, your job is to get to know each other well and then to promote each other. And within 6 months, all of those women were promoted. Next 3 things to finish: network, negotiate, and know your options. So networking, as you're doing here, really critical. Internal and external networks. Negotiate. Kate will tell you, the guys always negotiate their salaries. Women hardly ever do. And having been also in HR at one time, I can tell you that's true. So that's another thing to think about. And finally, knowing your options, keeping your skills relevant, so that if you are in an organisation where you're just not putting the 18,000 cracks in the glass ceiling that Hillary Clinton talks about, you are actually able to vote with your feet and move on and find another organisation that will appreciate you for who you are. So to finish with a saying from Melinda Gates, who said at Davos this year, women standing up for themselves and those around them is the strongest force for change. So a message for all of us to keep supporting each other. Thank you.
Great. Our next speaker, Connie, please go ahead.
Well, these have been fantastic comments that have been made so far, and I think I'm going to kind of throw away some of my notes and try to make them relevant to you, because a lot of what has been said thus far, I think, is quite relevant to how women can break the glass ceiling or get off the sticky floor. First, I probably ought to tell you just a little bit about myself. I know most of you are from Hawaii, but I was born and raised here, and am now the president and CEO of Hawaiian Electric Industries. And so we are the parent company and the publicly traded company that owns Hawaiian Electric Company, that serves all the islands of Hawaii except the island of Kauai. So 95% of the state is our service territory. We provide the electric service. And then we also own American Savings Bank, which is the third largest bank here in the state. A lot of the case has been made for the fact that women don't get to the top. I fortunately have gotten to the top because Hawaiian Electric Industries is the the largest publicly traded company here in Hawaii. But I will tell you that nationally within my industry, there are probably now about 60 publicly traded electric utilities, and there are maybe 3, maybe 4 of us who are women who are CEOs at the top. When I first started at Hawaiian Electric, there were no women officers. The highest woman was in a manager's position, and she was the union liaison. And so oftentimes you find in a compliance type function that they have almost had to put women in. I think that's part of what Amanda experienced when you were at World Bank. Institutions are not supposed to discriminate, but sometimes they do. And there actually was there was only one Asian or non-white officer, and he was a Japanese gentleman who had the regulatory function. Again, one that would interface with government where government is not supposed to discriminate. And I looked at the workforce, and actually in a way, maybe it wasn't so unusual that a woman would not be in an officer's role, because Hawaiian Electric is very engineering oriented since we provide electric service, and women generally have not gone into the so-called STEM areas. So 75% of our workforce was male. And so the numbers there, you would say, well, maybe that's a reason that there weren't that many women officers. But then when I went over to our banking side and was president CEO of American Savings Bank, banks are kind of the reverse. And 3/4 of our population there was actually female. But there weren't any women officers there either. And so something truly was happening. But a few years ago, someone asked me, did I feel like I had been discriminated against coming through in my career? And I actually had to think long and hard about it because, just from those statistics and some of the other statistics that you've heard today, I probably did encounter discrimination. But I didn't feel that way. And I didn't think that I had been discriminated against. And so I think a lot of it is that sticky floor, the beliefs that hold us back, and we are our own worst enemies. And so you need to have that frame of mind and that attitude that says you can do what anybody else can do. And you deserve to be in any one of those positions. I think I was helped because my father had said to me when I was a young girl, you should go to both business school and law school. And I do now have an MBA from Stanford and a law degree from the University of California, Hastings, and I practice as an attorney. I asked him why, and he said, of course, business is good because then you can run a business. And I said, well, the law, what about the law? And my vision of being a lawyer was a courtroom attorney and a litigator, and I just certainly did not see myself that way. But his answer to me was so that you would know your rights and be able to fight for yourself and the rights of others. I think you've kind of heard that already from some of our other speakers, that you have to feel like you are as entitled as anyone else, and then you have to ask for it. My husband has this wonderful phrase, don't ask, don't guess. But I gotta say, being a woman, a lot of times I feel hesitant to ask. And I think Amanda brought up something else that has been shown in the research. I was just at Stanford, and one of the professors there cited the same research about how women actually are very good advocates for others, but we're not very good advocates for ourselves. And kind of what was a breaking point in my career where I was able to learn to advocate was one day I said to myself, hey, I did go to law school and lawyers are supposed to be advocates. And what the heck am I doing here if I can't advocate, at least for others. And so once I got through that, that then allowed me to advocate for others. And women, you know, hopefully, if you think maybe not so much of advocating for yourself, but beginning to advocate for others, that will get you through the point where you can actually advocate for yourself as well. The other point that they brought up at Stanford was this one about how women get paid less, and it's because they don't negotiate. So they found that women got paid 10% less coming out of the very best business schools, but it's because 57% of the men actually would negotiate their salaries, whereas only 11% of the women negotiated their salaries. So I was very, very proud when my own daughter just graduated from Sloan at MIT, and they had taught her that research. And so when she got her first job offer, she negotiated, and what do you know? She got $10,000 more for negotiating, just asking. And I kept hearing my husband in my head, don't ask, don't get. So ladies, please ask, because as my husband also tells me, all they can tell you is no, right? All they can tell you is no. But if you don't ask, you never will get anything. So that's one major thing. I think one of the other points I just wanted to quickly address is a lot of people tell you should find mentors. And I agree. I mean, mentors are just wonderful. But frankly, when I ran American Savings Bank and I was on the list for U.S. Bankers' 25 Most Powerful Women in Banking in the U.S., and I went back to the award ceremony in New York City, and the 25 of us were talking, and the other 25 women to watch were talking. Most of us didn't have mentors. So just because you don't have a mentor doesn't mean that you can't succeed. It'd be wonderful if you had a mentor, but frankly, because of the lack of women at the top, you can't always find a mentor, and sometimes, you know, the guys don't mentor you, or they don't mentor you in the way that you need the mentoring. So just don't let that hold you back. And then the last point I would make is, for women, the work-life balance is a much bigger issue. And something that I always advocate is that you should not ignore your personal life. Because many women, because they want to break the glass ceiling, really focus on doing an excellent, excellent job at work. But somehow our personal lives always creep into our work lives, and it's very, very hard to make sure that you balance them off. So don't ignore your personal life. If you've got something going on in your personal life, whether it's caring for an aging parent or a relationship that's really important and you need to spend more time talking to that significant other about the balance in your lives and how you spend your time, do it. Because if you ignore it, somehow it always creeps back in. And I've seen that over and over and over again with many women at our companies who are great candidates for promotion, but when they take it and they have some personal issue, it just derails them. And it's better to pass up a promotion and attend to that personal issue, and then when you're ready, move on. Because when you take that job, you really have to perform and you have to do a good job. The other thing I tell our managers on the management side is, just because a woman turns down a promotion, don't write her off. Because most women, you know, if you are just about to have a kid, you know, you chose to bring that child into this world. And so that has to be your first priority. But it doesn't mean that when that child gets a little older and he or she goes off to kindergarten, that a woman may not be ready for a promotion. And you don't even have to wait till kindergarten. They go off to preschool, or daycare. But you've made some arrangement that works for you and works for your personal life. You can be ready to move on. So I'm going to stop there because I'm sure you all want to have some dialogue with us, and that's probably most important. So turning this over to Sabrina.
Aloha. Sorry, I'm not going to stand because I have notes. And I want to, these wonderful panelists have said so much of what I was going to say, so I'm just going to kind of highlight a few things. So one of the topics being the countries that don't have laws that don't allow discrimination. Of course, the U.S. is one of those countries that supposedly has equal rights under the law, but even in our country, we still do have a glass ceiling and a sticky floor. But the first step, if you're not from a country that doesn't if you're from a country that doesn't recognize equal rights, the legal change is extremely critical. And I can tell you that, in my view, the most important law that ever passed for women's rights, one of the most important after, of course, women's suffrage, was the 1972 amendment to the Title VII of the Educational Amendments to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It's what you referred to as Title IX. Legally, it's now called the Patsy Takemoto Mink Equal Opportunity in Education Act, and it's really important to recognize that it was a local Asian American woman that shepherded that law through Congress, which basically said that no educational institution receiving federal funds can discriminate on the basis of gender. Recognized that in 1972, when that law passed, only 7% of all law school graduates in the United States were women, and only 9% of all medical school graduates in the United States were women. So recognize the impact of the law, and what Patsy Takemoto Mink, a local Asian woman who had the audacity to run for president in 1972, I think it was also, have the audacity to be bold and be brave and speak up when there's something wrong with the law. So in terms of mentorship, I agree. Sometimes it's hard to get mentors, but I want to talk about something that Royanne Doi of Prudential in Japan, the worldwide ethics director for Prudential. She's an attorney also, but she's a local woman, but she's heading Prudential's ethics division throughout the world. She talks about mentors, sponsors, coaches, and role models. And mentors are the people that you can speak to about anything. Look for sponsors, if you can, people that will help you through an organization. Sometimes it's not women, sometimes it's men. When I was coming up through the ranks of my law firm in 1982, it was men that helped me because there were very few women in front of me. But there were men that were willing to support. So the importance of going to a place that has a supportive atmosphere. I'll never forget my first year, we have on-campus interviews for law students. One of the Japanese American partners during his interview would ask me questions like, you realize if you come to work for our firm, you can't leave during the middle of the day to go to PTA meetings. Or you realize, do you plan to come to work for us and then get married in a couple years and quit? And so sometimes you have to speak up. So I just remember being like this very young woman, law student, that really wanted a job. But what I did was I smiled and I said, may I ask you a question? And he said, sure. And I said, do you ask your male applicants these questions? And I reported him to our campus recruiting office. That night he called to offer me a job because he knew he was in trouble. These were all illegal questions. But I said, thank you, but no thank you. And I went to a firm that was supportive and that had people that were willing to sponsor me, to help me through the ranks, that wanted to elevate women, to help women get ahead. And these were male partners that really, really helped me. So and in terms of the sponsors, I found ways to try to approach them so that they would get to know me more. It helped. I played basketball for UH, so it was helpful. All the statistics show that women that play sports do tend to do better in the business world and also in the law. But if you didn't, that's fine. I have a really good friend that never played sports, but she's really into sports. She's the former general counsel of the University of Hawaii. but you can talk to her about football. She knows more about football than most men. And what else would we do? We started off practicing law together. The male partners would have lunch in one of the conference rooms. We'd grab our brown bag lunches and we'd go in there and we'd sit down with the male partners at lunch. We leaned in, we took our seat at the table and we just chatted with them. And they would talk about the weekend games or they would talk about stocks. So I started following the stock market, to try to be able to engage in these conversations with these guys. Anyway, but these men really did help me. So, let's see. Believe in yourself. Be bold. Believe in yourself. The first time I applied to be a judge, I didn't make the list. There's a commission, they boil it down. I didn't make the list. The second time I did make the list. I've been on a district court since 1993, and then in 1995 I was elevated to the circuit court. I didn't tell the governor when I interviewed with him that I was pregnant at the time that I was interviewing with him. But that's okay, because it was none of his business, because I know the law. There's no pregnancy discrimination, and he wouldn't be able to discriminate. And so anyway, I had my baby after I started at the circuit court, and then I started applying for appellate judgeships. First time I applied, I didn't make the list. The next 7 or 8 times, I made the list but was not selected. People thought I was crazy because I kept applying. A lot of women that applied with me gave up, but I kept applying. And in 2011, when I applied and I made the list, Governor Abercrombie selected me for the Supreme Court. And so the point being, don't give up. Keep trying. In terms of, a lot of women don't put themselves forward. There's that great article in Atlantic that talks about, and I've seen it because as the head of family court, I was in family court before. I headed the per diem judge committee. And these are attorneys that serve as judges per diem. You look at the applications, you would see, I couldn't believe some of these men were applying. I'm like, you think just because you have a law degree, you can be a judge? Whereas the women, all the statistics show that women will not apply for a job unless they at least meet 100% of the MQs. The statistics show that men will apply even if they only meet 60% of the MQs, minimum qualifications. Apply. There was a judgeship for circuit court. There was a woman, she was a great young district court judge. I said, apply. And she said, oh no, but I said, no, you are well qualified. I want you to apply. She's now a circuit court judge, right? So that's what, you've got to apply. She was so well qualified, but she didn't think she was. She was so much more qualified than a lot of the men that were applying. So you have to apply. You have to believe in yourself, and you have to keep going. You have to speak up. You have to challenge. I'll never forget, talking about the country clubs. A friend of mine, Stanford golfer, Hastings Law graduate, Wildlife Country Club had a policy. You can give your membership to your son, but not to your daughter. She challenged it, right? And sometimes women have to speak up. Mayor Eileen Anderson was offered a Pacific Club membership. All these, when she became mayor, you are offered all these honorary memberships. She said, I am not interested in becoming a member of any institution that would not allow me in otherwise, right? Because at that time, Pacific Club didn't accept women. And of course, she then had the liquor laws changed to say that you can't have a liquor license if you discriminate on the grounds of gender. So that's why all the public-private clubs started accepting women here, right? It's the power of the law, right? So anyway, let's see. Implicit bias, extremely, extremely important. We do implicit bias training for judges in the state of Hawaii. I decided to be a guinea pig. Just go online, the Harvard Implicit Association test or something. You can take these tests, all the implicit biases that we have. I said, I will be the guinea pig in front of all the judges of the state of Hawaii. Let me do the one on women in business. And it showed that even I have implicit biases about women in business, women in leadership. It's the way we work, it's all implicit. It's important to recognize it, and it's important for people to talk about it and have people recognize that it exists. Okay, so finally, support each other. We need to support each other. Don't believe in the myth of the catty woman. Read that Sheryl Sandberg recent article on the myth of the catty woman. That's a myth. Women, do not think that there's only one seat for a woman. We can all support each other. I was on a panel recently with Bettina Maynard. She's the CEO of Architects Hawaii. When she started, she was the only woman. And she's now COO, CEO. I think they have more than half women now. They have so many women architects at that firm now. So anyway, we can all support each other, and I look forward to all you young women. Just don't hold back. You can make it. You can do whatever you want to do. Believe in yourself.
Thank you so much for all these inspiring speech to inspire the young ladies here. Don't give up, just to go on, move to your next goal. So I like to, because we have very limited time, and I like to take 2 or 3 questions from the audience. Oh yeah, okay.
I have more of a, I guess, a comment to add to the discussion, that I think it's important for women to support each other. However, I also think it's important to support men who want to take on different roles that generally are not masculine, such as wanting to, when people, I work in HR with Lisa Sakamoto, by the way, Connie, when you know her, but so, a lot of men say, well, that's just maternity leave. No, it's not maternity leave, it's FMLA leave, okay, for the birth of a child. You can take up to 12 weeks as a male or a female for the birth of a child. So when someone wants to do that, we should support that, because it starts evening the playing field as far as what men can do and women can do, and then we start to be seen more as equals than as this is the male role and this is the female role. And so I think that part is something that's really important in the employment culture, to start breaking the glass ceiling, is to really, and even even for women, when you have a baby, oh, well, take all the leave you can, you're not going to get this. I decided to come back after 6 weeks because that was my choice, okay, because I felt that was what was right for me and my family, and my husband stayed at home with the baby. Okay, so I think that things like that, the mommy guilt, and it doesn't have to be one way. There's many ways to do something, and that works for each and individual family. So my whole thing is, don't get stuck in the norm, and break that norm, because I think that's what's going to help in the long run.
Good point. Yeah, okay, share you.
I just add one quick comment. If you do want to get to the very top job, to the CEO's job, you cannot discriminate against anybody. And so while we're talking about making sure that women have a level playing field, you also have to promote, as our person here just commented, everybody, so that everybody succeeds, and we all win when everybody succeeds.
Okay, this lady, please stand up.
I can just talk loud.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much. This was a really exciting panel, and had a lot of good tidbits to ponder and carry forward as I help mentor young women too. My question is for Kate, actually. So Kate did a great job of sort of setting up this is the problem. I think out of all the panelists, I didn't hear your advice. So what are some tidbits from you?
Yeah, sure, sorry, and I did have lots of advice. And, she says paging back through her notes. But look, I think I can summarize it. We had a really wonderful guy in Australia called David Morrison. He was the chief of our army. And we've had a lot of problems, probably like the US Defence Force. We've had a lot of problems for women in the Defence Force in Australia. And men as well, but some very high-profile problems for women. And there was one, and without going into other than, it involved sex and, lots of men and emails, and it was very nasty. And he is chief of the army, and I know him well, and I love him dearly. He's about 5'5", so he's short. And overnight, he didn't go and have a committee meeting about what to do. He put his combat fatigues on, and he filmed a video, which if you Google David Morrison Army, it'll come up on YouTube, top of the list. He put his combat fatigues on, not his General Morrison uniform. He put his combat fatigues on, and he said, essentially, if you want to behave like this, get out of my army. The behaviour that you walk past is the behaviour you accept, and this behaviour is unacceptable. And it was just this overnight viral hit, because he hadn't paused to be politically correct and check with the media. He just did it, and he put it out there, and he said, this is my army, and this will not happen. The behaviour that you walk past is the behaviour that you accept. And so it sort of echoes what Sabrina said about challenge, in fact, what a number of people have said. And so I put that challenge out to you, which is challenge yourself about your bias, okay? Think about, in the really important processes that you are involved in that can affect people in your organisation. So those are recruitment and performance management would be top of the list, okay? You accept you're biased, okay? Go and do that Harvard IAT test, okay? It's called the Harvard IAT, and it's the gender career test is what you need to do. Go and do it. It'll take you 10, 15 minutes. It's fabulous, and it will show you have biases, okay? So you need to make sure when you're doing recruitment, when you're doing performance management, that you have enough women represented in the pile that you're selecting from. So critical mass is 30%. So however many people you're assessing, are there 30% women for you to make an even judgment about their performance or whether they're suitable for that job? Does your selection panel have men and women and ethnicity? Is it a diverse group that are not going to look for people like them? Because that's why typically, and I keep having to refer back to Australia, but our senior management is white male over 55. And you can drill into some slightly funnier things, like I know that Malcolm Gladwell looked at how many CEOs in the US are over 6'2", but they represent something like 14% of the population, but I'm making up the numbers a little bit now, 60% of the CEOs are over 6 foot. We have so many biases. If you become conscious about them, then they're not unconscious biases anymore. So challenge yourself, particularly in recruitment processes and performance management, because that's what people get paid on, and that's how they get promoted. And then secondly, challenge the people around you and the organisation that you work in. Don't be afraid. We heard the example from Amanda. Like, the behaviour you walk past is the behaviour you accept. You see something happening that is going to impact on that person's career. And I say person because it could be the man who wants to take parental leave to look after his kid. Because not all women want to stay at home and look after their kids. And not all men want to go to work and not look after their kids. So if you see it, challenge it. Because if you don't, who will? I think that, and I can't quote it properly, but there's a good Rudyard Kipling quote, which is, if not now, when? If not you, who? So challenge yourself, challenge others around you.
One more last question?
This is kind of a random question, but if anybody wants to tackle it, what would your advice to Hillary Clinton be?
I want to hear what Sabrina's got to say. Go on, Sabrina, you must have a view. Come on.
I can't publicly support any politician.
What advice would you have for a woman running
Just
for president?
advice, a generic advice.
I can't.
Connie, go
I
on.
don't think
Miss USA question.
Unfortunately, I think that it has been a much harder road for Hillary. Every spotlight is on her, and I actually think she's doing a great job. And that's what all of us have to do, is you have to just keep going. And to be a little controversial about, if not who,
Yes.
and just being practical, you will encounter hurdles constantly. And frankly, you have to pick and choose. You can't fight every single battle, but you have to do, it's kind of like risk-adjusted return for those of you who are in business. You know, you got to judge what's the return that you might get and what's the risk that you run when you challenge. And is it worth it? Because we all have only so much energy, and you need to save it for the battles that count.
That's good.